I had to.
Okay, thank you so much. Brilliant, what a start. Hi everyone, welcome to Asa's In Conversation With series. I'm absolutely delighted, as you can probably tell by the laughter right at the very top of the show, to be joined by Dr. Asa Don Brown. Asa, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
Doing quite well. How are you doing?
I'm fabulous. I've actually enjoyed the preparation for today, and for those of the audience that haven't kind of been following some of the stuff that we've done previously, let me just give a bit of an introduction. So, Asa is a speaker, an author, an advocate, a consultant, a psychologist. He's also trained in profiling, so you know he's going to be right up my street. He's also a trained negotiator and an all-round good egg. And I don't think I've left anything off on there, but why don't you kind of pick up the story, let people know a bit more about the amazing Dr. Asa Don Brown.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those very kind words. Yes, I have had quite a bit of training. You know, it's one of those things that I'm tongue-tied here. So there we go. There's a start for both of us. No, for me, learning education is something that I'm always open to. And as you were saying, you know, I've got a list of different things that I've pursued. When I have a challenge, if I don't know something, if I'm unaware of something, I pursue it. If I'm fearful of it, I pursue it. And one of the things you did not list, and I'll say that not because I'm trying to give my vita, and I don't really care about that, but being a firefighter, there were a few reasons I joined being a volunteer firefighter here in the States, here in New York. And some of those stem from my background working with first responders in Canada and the States. Some of it stemmed from my own insecurities or fears around certain things. And, for me, I believe in challenging anything that we may be unaware of, we may fear, challenging anything that we feel that we can use improvement in a specific area. And so I challenged myself, and I went through boot camp, and I was the second oldest individual going through boot camp. And I can tell you that was quite a humbling experience when you've got a bunch of 20-year-old guys and gals going through boot camp, and you're struggling to keep up. But for me, it's that opportunity to learn. And that's why you'll hear this wellhouse of this list of information that I've gone through to obtain. It's not so much to have those credentials, but rather to challenge myself to learn and to be of better service to those that I'm serving.
And I think that's something that, in the conversations that we've had prior to this, and I'm sure into the future, that really kind of stood out for both Bonnie and I, was that everything in your career path has always stemmed from a desire to understand.
Yes.
And I think, okay, volunteer firefighter and hero worship, goes to another level now. But the career path that you've been through, the experiences that you've had, they're not what you would say are a linear path from point A to point B. You've had an immense amount of experience, and to get to where you are now. What would you say was probably your toughest challenge, and how do you feel that challenge impacts you now?
To be honest, being a dad. Being a father, you know, has been one area in my life that I would say has been the greatest challenge, because it's learning to not only be empathic, it's learning at a whole different level, but it's learning to become okay with the areas in your life that you know that you can use some improvement. It's it's being open to personal criticisms. It's being open to, you know, um, personal development, and, you know, to a whole different level than being a student. You know, if you don't like a professor, what a professor has, well, that's okay. You won't have them next semester. Um, you know, but when it comes to your children and your family, it's it's an opportunity, and that's the way I see life. You know, it's not a bad thing. It's a challenge, and if we have a challenge, that's an opportunity for growth.
Mhm.
And that's why I pursue so many things. That's why I will not stop pursuing. I think if you're going to live life, you've got one chance at this life. Why not live it to its fullest? Why not be a guitar, you know, player? Why not go out and become a speaker or a radio interviewer, or TV interviewer or podcast interviewer? There you go. Um,
I'm doing my best here.
oh, you're doing a great job. You're doing a
and,
great.
and one of the things that really kind of got me hooked on kind of finding out more about your journey and where you're at now is the fact that you've worked cross border in the Americas. You've worked in Canada, you've worked in
Mhm.
the US, and the perception of both cultures is very, very different. And it kind of struck me as if you can work to almost what appears from the outside as those extremes of personality, then you have to have a flexibility as an individual that goes beyond what just happens with multiple clients in the same arena. Um, and kind of, how do you feel that flexibility plays out? Do you feel that that flexibility is needed?
Certainly. And, you know, it's not just a cultural flexibility, but it's being willing to adapt. Again, it's sort of like being a father. You know, it's learning the nuances of that culture. It's learning, you know, even within the States, even within Canada, you go from the East Coast to Canada, which is there's a dominance of a French population. There's a dominance of a much older culture. um, it's much more ingrained. You know, the Canadian way is much more ingrained. Going to the West Coast where I lived, where it's still a very young, very developing culture. Um, you have to learn the language of the community with which you live.
Mm.
And I lived in Alberta. I lived in British Columbia. You know, here in the States, I've lived in Washington State, Montana, Colorado, Oklahoma, and now New York. And I can tell you, and having traveled quite a bit of both countries, I can tell you that each community, even within the states themselves, each community speaks a different language.
Mm.
The way they present will different as well, will differ as well. And you have to be open and receptive to those languages. You
Mm.
know, um, I'll give you an example. Early on, my wife is Canadian. I'm a dual citizen. I'm Canadian and American. My children are as well. And early on in our marriage, now we've been married 23 years. And so,
Congratulations.
what's that?
Congratulations.
Thank you. You know, so I've gotten to know her. I'm still learning all about my wife, and still learning how to relate to certain things. But early on in our marriage, very early on in our marriage, I recall my mother-in-law asking me one day, and this is a good example of how language can be a barrier. Sometimes it can be something that we have to be very receptive to, and active listening is a big part of that. And my mother-in-law looks at me one day and says to me, Now, Asa, do you have any rubbers?
Oh,
Uh,
that has a whole heap of connotations.
oh, it does. And so, I give you that, and so early on, and I'm thinking, okay, mom, that's quite a personal question. And being from the States, we did not refer to our rubber boots as rubbers. Being from this part of the States that I'm from, I never heard them addressed as rubbers.
Mm.
And so I had to learn the language of those that were in my life. I had to learn the language and the significance of what she was asking. And of course, it's it's a good thing to have rubber boots or rubbers when you're out in the snow, going out and about. And so, I had to learn that language and adapt to that. And if you're not willing to learn and adapt and change, and it doesn't mean you're getting rid of your own identity. It means you're developing a new identity,
Yeah.
and that's the thing for me is I have found that, and believe me, I'm no expert at it. It's taken me years to learn, but if you're willing to be open, change will surely come, and it will make you a better person.
Yeah.
Because what I have tried doing is taking those things from each culture I've lived in, each community I've been around, and even academically, those communities, I've tried to gain what I could gain. I've tried to learn what I could learn from those that are around me. And again, children have been some of my greatest teachers. My patients have been some of my greatest teachers.
Mm.
And not to downplay those that have taught me, but but I can guarantee you that I've learned as much, if not more, from my students, my my children, my own children, and my patients,
Mm.
because I was receptive to what they were saying. I wasn't there to be heard. I was there to hear,
Mm.
and
And
that's what. Yes,
that, that, that hearing to understand, that hearing to grow, I think is something that the more people understand that speaking to be heard is only effective if the people that are hearing are understanding. And
mm,
it is a two-way street in communication. And I think it's, the work that you've done throughout your career has kind of, that is evident right the way through. Um, so let me ask, what got you started on your journey to psychology?
my journey to psychology. How did I come to this place?
Yay!
Um, you know,
Number
you know,
47 bus at 7 o'clock this morning.
yes. It's kind of like that old commercial. I think it's Bosley, the hair commercial. I'm not just, I'm not just the CEO of this company, but I'm a member. Yes, I went through counseling as a child. I met with some different psychologists over the years. But that's not how I really got into psychology, although it did help and it gave me an understanding. For me, actually, my background was religion. And I have a BS in theology, religion, and marketing. Um, anyhow, I was looking at changing my path and yet staying in a similar area, something that I could work with folks, that I can affect people in a positive way, and that I felt like I can contribute to others. And so, in my master's, before my master's, I began thinking about various academic pursuits, and what have I done all along, having served in ministry and having worked in, and at that point having already worked in politics, was serving others. And so naturally, I decided to go into psychology. Learned quite a bit about psychology. My ideological perspectives, my views, worldviews, and perceptions of psychology definitely were shattered when I entered the field, because I'd always had this perception that psychologists must have the right way of thinking. that they've figured life out. And when I entered the field, that that glass ceiling was shattered.
Mm.
I soon realized that just like ministry, just like any other field, there are people that are broken that are entering the field of psychology and counseling. There are people that are coming with angst, looking for answers for themselves. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and in fact, I think that any good therapist of any type should always be open to change and should always be willing to adapt and be comfortable with being vulnerable.
Yeah,
And so yes.
I was just going to say that vulnerability of change, uh,
Yes.
of when as a coach, I do exactly the same. I'm always looking at the growth, and not just with the client, but how am I able to grow
Mhm.
alongside them, and the you know the idea that somehow the professional has the letters after their name and therefore they have the life sorted, is probably one of the biggest myths
Agree.
around the sector. Um, but I think there's also an element within the education of professionals on both coaching and counseling and psychology, where that myth is almost protected to a
Hmm.
degree until they're through the training process.
Hmm.
And I know in your work as an educator, you try and avoid that kind of protectionism of that idea. I think when we look at your work as an advocate of the sector, that comes across very heavily. So I kind of wanted to ask you, in the role as a speaker,
Hmm.
when you are kind of in that moment of, here's the message I want to get across to a particular audience,
Hmm.
what's that moment of delivery for you? As experienced as you are, how poignant is that moment for you just as you're about to deliver the point of your message?
Mm, great question. You know, when it comes to speaking, and of course, it depends on who my audience is. It's I like to have a personal relationship somewhat with the message. It doesn't mean I haven't spoke or addressed issues that I don't have a relationship with,
Mm.
but understanding, being empathic, having some awareness, for me as a speaker or any other role that I'm taking on, I like to know those that I'm serving, really know them. It's one thing to know, it's like this when I talk about friendships and when I talk about, to my patients or others I've worked with in the past consulting, there are people that will often say, well, do you know Asa Brown? Well, of course I know Asa Brown. Now here's the question: do you really know Asa Brown?
Mm.
To really know someone, not only do you have to actively listen and have good communication, but you have to and be empathic, but you have to really listen verbally and non-verbally to the message that they're speaking, to the communications that they're communicating. We know that it depends on the research you read, but nonverbal messages are anywhere from about 70 to 80% of those things that we communicate.
Mm.
And when I'm speaking to
Adults.
what's that?
That's in adults.
That's
In
another.
children, it's slightly different.
It
And I
is.
think sometimes a lot of adults forget that children don't work the same way yet. They're still getting there.
They're still learning, yes. And, but but being receptive to that and being willing to heed what, I've gone into events, Dave, where I had a message and I had this delivery. In fact, I had one where they had it up on the screen, and to where I could read my message, and you know I had that message down pat. I knew the message, and I like to arrive early to any event that I'm speaking at.
Mm.
Sometimes a few days early, to get to know the community, to get to know the people,
Mm.
and get to know those that I'm serving. I had gotten to know this one particular organization that I spoke with, and when I got there, we'd done a few Zoom calls, or back in that day it was actually Skype. We had done a few Skype calls, and when I arrived there, it was a whole different message that I was receiving,
Mm.
whole different message being communicated by those that I was going to be serving. The message, it's funny. We can all present a particular way. We can all wear a certain mask.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive me for that. We can all go about life in a certain way and communicate things non-verbally in a way that we want to be heard or seen. We can wear a smile, doesn't mean we're happy.
Mm.
In fact, I think real happiness is essentially having peace in your heart,
Yeah. No,
having
I agree that piece that comes from the balance of all of the component parts and being able to flex to what's going on around us is something that gives us that. And and when we're speaking, and we've both done speaking events,
mm-hmm.
I'm nowhere near to the level that you are. Let's be blatantly honest here. But the that moment of delivering a message, that flexibility to understand, okay, I've come here with this message, but this audience needs something else. Being able
Mm-hmm.
to respond in the moment is something that I think a lot of speakers fall short with, because
Mm.
they've got their message and they want to share their message. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
some of the footage of speakers that are able to flex even mid-presentation, I think is phenomenal. And I know it's something that, when you've done presentations, and in your answer just now, that the poignancy of getting to know the audience and being there early enough in order to give yourself that time, I think is really, really powerful. And I think it also allows the audience to understand that you're understanding them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if during a presentation you're having to flex away from what you originally started with
Mm-hmm.
in order to kind of support that audience that you're serving by giving that speech.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you enjoy most of all of the parts that you do at the moment? What do you enjoy most?
Honestly, and it's going to sound, as my wife would describe it, as me being a suck. I love being a father.
Mm-hmm.
I love being a husband. It's, for me, it's a constant learning opportunity to learn, but it's also having that unconditional love and acceptance that is only expressed, you know, um, through, you can verbally say I love someone. It's those nonverbal communications that I pick up, and sometimes my children don't like that.
Yeah.
That's a whole different that's a whole different discussion. But it's so, other than my family, and I'll quit being that suck, as my wife would call me.
Uh-huh.
You know, honestly, serving as a therapist. While I'm no longer officially, we're going to do that again, working as a therapist in practice. I don't. I think when it's so innate, when it becomes such an inherent part of your being,
Mhm.
you don't stop being a therapist. You can't turn that off. And I really do believe that some people are born therapists.
Mm.
And I think some people develop into therapists. I would say mine's been a combination. I could recall early on, and I don't know if I've mentioned this or not, but even in high school, I was serving in a therapeutic clinic
Wow.
and doing some counseling. It's a little frightening knowing the things I may have suggested or advice I may have given, but it was definitely a learning opportunity, a learning curve in my life. Um, I look back on that with fondness, and I look back on that and understand there's so many things I would have done differently. But that's life, and as a therapist, practicing all these years, believe me, there are things I would have done differently, over the span of my career. But I would say being a therapist, even although I would say being a professor is very similar, being a therapist, there's some satisfaction in watching an individual, and I don't believe I have the answers. I'm just simply a roadmap. Understand that. I'm generation 1.0 GPS. No, I you know I'm a guidance system for these patients. And for me, when a patient says, Asa, you've made me, I'll express to them, no, you have made yourself.
Yeah.
You have made this choice.
Facilitation is different from driving.
What's that?
Facilitation is different from driving.
It is. And and I think, we will always have guide maps,
Hmm.
but we can choose whether or not we're going to follow the path that's being
Hmm.
delivered to us. And and not everyone's going to follow the path I offer. And sometimes, believe it or not, they'll find their own health on a different path, and then I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
In fact, as a therapist, one thing I learned early on was, people aren't coming for Asa Brown. They're
Hmm.
not coming because of all my credentials or my extensive background. They're coming to be well.
Hmm.
And that gives me some of the greatest joy in my life,
Hmm.
is to have a patient come to a place of health. Health doesn't mean we're perfect. And
Oh,
happy
awful.
no, and happiness doesn't mean we're perfect. In fact, I believe that we can be happy in the midst of trauma. I believe we can, and again, I believe happiness is peace. It's not giddiness. It's not a smile on your face, but it's having that peace to know, that self-assurance to know that whatever I'm going through, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think the idea of mental health as a condition, for want of a better phrase, that somehow when things are going bad, we have bad mental health.
Hmm.
And when things are going okay, we don't have mental health. And mental health to me has always been a constant. Just like our physical health,
Hmm.
it goes up, it comes down, and it's constantly moving based on our perceptions of the world around us
I agree.
and our responses to that perception. And it's those two parts of that equation that kind of excite me the most when I'm working with somebody, to be able to understand what's the perception of what's happening and what is the reaction and their response to it. And then working on getting to where they want their response to be to those perceptions and those understandings.
Hmm.
And I think the role of facilitating that, whether that's as a coach, whether that's as a counselor, whether that's as a psychologist, there is a thread between all three.
Hmm.
That when we work with someone effectively, we're not guiding the destination. We're literally there holding and guiding the kind of responses and the understanding so that the individual can make those choices based on new understanding of themselves, but also for themselves.
Well, you're correct. And what we're in essence doing is we're empowering them to make those choices.
Mm.
Empowerment is such, we're living in a world today that people are feeling as though they're lacking power. Various communities are feeling as though they're lacking power. Whether you're looking at the US or you're looking at Hong Kong or you're looking anywhere else in the world,
Mm.
there's an outcry of people saying, I don't feel like I have power in my life.
Mm.
I feel like I have been done wrong. And, really what they're needing is to be able to voice,
Mm.
being able to make some decisions that's going to have a positive effect upon their life. And being a therapist, I think any good therapist, when you come to see me, if you were my patient, Dave, there are a couple things I always have. My disclaimer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And my disclaimer is, first of all, you're not here to like me. And sometimes you may not like me.
Mm-hmm.
You're not here to be my friend. You're not, and if you don't like my work, and believe it or not, some people haven't liked the way I deliver the message, I will help you to find a new therapist,
Mm.
one that meets you at where you're at
Mm.
and understands you. And, the one thing I've always tried doing through my therapeutic work in my life, I mean, it's not just, again, it's not a hat that I take off at the therapeutic door.
Yeah.
It's something I wear constantly. And so
Mm.
for my children, for my family, for my friends, for those in my life, I want to empower them around me.
Mm.
Now, for my children, one thing I've learned is empowering your child to voice what they need to voice can be very humbling. And sometimes I don't like hearing what they need to voice,
Yeah.
you know, but that's true for anyone we empower because we have to be receptive to those we empower. We can't dismiss them.
Yeah. And I think the thing that always kind of strikes me in effective working is that empowerment comes with rights and responsibilities.
Mm,
And you can empower somebody with rights, but if responsibility is not empowered to go alongside that, you create an imbalance
you do.
from
You
the
do.
outset. And
That's important.
when I wrote in the Psychological Hive, the idea of needs, wants, and desires, it was very much about, by understanding each of those component parts, we understand the right and the responsibility that comes with all of them. And
Mm,
when we need something, and all of the theories around, the idea of need, what a
mm,
human needs,
mm,
will be talked about until the sun takes over and the planet burns. But the idea of, as humans, understanding the need and the want being two different things and not convoluting those, once you're empowered, you're also able then to understand other people's needs and wants.
very
And
true.
then you can adjust your interaction accordingly. But without that understanding, without that
Mm,
empowerment of the rights and responsibilities right at the very outset, you set everything up to fall down later. In my humble opinion, you create the environment where you're almost set to create a problem further down the road.
mhm.
Um,
Very true. And very true. And, and I think a part of those rights and responsibilities is recognizing when we're wrong,
yeah.
recognizing that we have room for improvement. You know, I recall early on in my career, actually, I recall one specific event in my doctorate where I sat down in my in an exam, And, here I'm sitting in front of a former president of American Psych Association.
Mhm.
I'm also sitting in front of the former president of American Psychotherapy Association. And I'm the only one in that exam room. And, one thing I learned that I had already began learning by that point, but it really hit home that moment after that exam was as they were testing me. And this is a 4-hour exam,
Wow.
various types of exams. You talk about intimidation. I walk in a room, I swear it was the longest room on the planet. Walk to
It
the
got longer
room,
with every step.
get longer every step, get down to the front, and here are two men with all sorts of accolades, prestige, and I'm sitting there trembling, or at least I felt I was.
Mm.
It was during the exam that one point they asked me some questions, and these were written, oral, all the way across. And at one point I looked at them and I said, I don't know. I don't know the answer. And it's okay to not know. And it's okay to fail.
Mm.
In my life, I have failed at things, believe it or not. That's a joke.
Okay, no, I'm shocked. I'm almost devastated. I'm
No,
joking,
no,
I'm
no.
joking.
But for me,
Success
failure.
comes from failure. You
What's
cannot.
that?
Success comes from failure.
It does. But failure, we have stigmatized failure. We have stigmatized it in a way that if you fail, you are a failure.
Yeah,
For me, no.
yeah.
Failure is merely a roadblock begging for us to go around it. It's
Mm,
challenging us to improve.
mm,
And some of the greatest minds on this planet have been individuals that have recognized that and have said, failure is just an obstacle.
mm.
What am I going to do with it?
This, yeah, I can cast my mind back to one of my very last time trials at Crystal Palace on the athletics track.
Mm,
And I was quite successful back in the day. For my age, I was competing above my years for quite a while. But I can remember being told by a very famous 400-meter hurdler who
mm,
was, she's an amazing, phenomenal individual, and I love her to bits.
mm,
Uh, who basically pulled me to one side and said, until you know what it's like to lose races,
mm.
you are going to not appreciate the winning.
I agree.
And for that, I will always be grateful. And Sally Gunnell, at some point, I'm sure you'll see this. I do remember and I do appreciate. Thank you so much. But it brought me back down to earth at a point in time where I was on a high.
Mm,
And I'd almost forgotten what it was like to have that knock. And
mm,
it just reminded me I didn't need to have the knock. I needed to remember the old knocks and not lose sight of those
mm,
falls in the past. And
mm,
it was very powerful at 17 to be told by an Olympian that, you know what, you're going to have to know what it's like. You're going to have to hold on to that. And it stuck with me. What would you say was your toughest challenge outside of fatherhood, as a either as an academic or as a clinician?
mm. Trying to find that right one. Um, Interviewed by Dave. No, no, probably the toughest challenge for me was academia and the beginning pursuit of that. And a part of that stems from some personal health issues that I had as a youth, as a child. I had missed some opportunities for academic education.
Mhm.
And so that's part of that. Um, but again, was learning how to learn. You know, I don't think we prepare our youth to really go on to that next step beyond high school. And so I think we do our best, but I don't think you can really, because it's not just being an academic, it's having that new freedom. It's having so many things go on that you're thrusting a child into this whole new world. And so I would say, that was a part of it. Going from that to also going to a Catholic university, which I'm not Catholic. It caused me to, especially studying theology and religion, it caused me to question, why is it that I believe what I believe? Why is it that I have listened to others' theories of beliefs? And how do I believe what I believe? Not what have I been taught to believe, but what is it that I really genuinely believe?
What's that inner locus of evaluation compared to what's the outer locus of evaluation?
Exactly.
See, I do pay attention. And I think that's something, that level of self-awareness, that when anybody sets out on a journey around psychology in any field, but also in any interactive engagement, whatever that field might be, that self-awareness and that personal knowledge of self is something that allows people to stand out and develop their own balance. And that is something that we see in the most successful people in history, is that they all have this innate understanding of themselves. They know their limits, but they always push and grow the weaknesses rather than dominate on the strengths. And we've talked in the past about leadership and styles of leadership and personalities, and the profiles. And I just want to touch briefly on the profiling side of your experience, because not a lot of people kind of know the history of profiling and how it's evolved and got to where we are now. But the first world leader to be profiled from a distance was Adolf Hitler. And that profile was redone several times in those early 1930s and into the 40s, because profiling understanding grew. We understood personalities differently in such a very short space of time. Where we are now in understanding profiling and body language and nuances and tone of voice, all of these things now play a part. One, what sparks your interest in profiling? But two, how powerful do you see it and how useful do you see it as a tool in psychology?
Oh, great question. Profiling for me, and really I would intertwine it with Haas's negotiation. I have done both. Profiling, though, I got my start because of some experiences and some opportunities that came along. It is something that, when we hear the word profiling, it's got, again, it has a stigma that actually surpasses even the stigma of psychology. Not all profiling is necessarily bad. It can give us an understanding and a structure of the way an individual's thinking, what they may have done, who may have done that. And yet, it also allows us, and unfairly, maybe I should say that way, in my exam room, working with my children, working with others, friends, what have you, you know, I wish I could take the hat off, but I can't, because it's a constant now. It has taught me to look out for certain things. Am I wrong at times? Yes. But when it comes to your gut impressions, and I think we're all innately born with the ability to profile. Mine's been fine-tuned.
Risk assessment.
Yeah, sorry.
From a young age, we're being groomed into understanding risks, and those risks ultimately fall into profiles of risk.
Yeah. What does this look like? Why does it look like this? Should I be, it's funny to me, and I honestly, genuinely believe that typically I do not look at color or culture or creed. I look at the individual. I've had individuals of various cultures that are the majority cultures that have struck me wrong. Actually, I would say more often than some of the minority cultures that are often pinned as being the ones that you should profile. I have had individuals that are I've had individuals I've worked with or that I had to work to profile that are individuals that you would think that would be above reproach. And we see that throughout the global community. They're not above reproach. And so, when it comes to profiling, everyone can be profiled. No one is without error in life. And so I try not to cast a judgment when I'm been hired to profile. Recently, I had to do it's a little off topic, but not much. I had to do a assessment of an individual that had passed and forensic. And there's a bit of profiling that comes into play. The question that was posed to me, and this has actually happened, I've actually had about 3 cases, similar cases in the past, recent past, that if a government body comes to me and says, our question is, did this individual take his or her own life? Our question is, were drugs and alcohol involved? And do you believe that that led to an issue of depression, which ultimately led to issue of suicide? Now, like I say, I've had this posed to me, interesting enough. I've had 3 cases in the last year. I've had 4 or 5 cases of this caliber in the last couple of years. And it's a tough thing to try to distinguish when you have an individual that is no longer living. So you're taking information and you're trying to create a profile of what this individual looked like before and after, and during what led up to this.
Yeah.
And it's a bit humbling to do that.
Sometimes the authorities that are asking for that sometimes are needing more awareness of the transition from situation to reaction to response to coping strategy to outcome.
Right.
Because to me it seems drugs and alcohol are in play, therefore there must be depression, therefore there must be a risk of suicide, therefore that's the journey. And we need somebody, and actually it's almost spun on its head, because situation trauma causes the depression, causes the drink as a coping strategy. The coping strategy doesn't actually work. The depression increases, the anxiety increases because the depression is increasing. Therefore, the drugs and alcohol increase because that's the coping strategy. And that cycle just spins on. But the authorities looking at that don't see the cycle. They see a line,
Outcome.
and it starts with drinks or it starts with alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and that leads to the rest.
Yeah.
Would you see that in your experience too?
Yes. Well, and for me, Dave, I think we've had a discussion about this in the past, and for me, it's not a popular stance that I take, but there's a part of me that does not believe in the current addiction model,
Mm-hmm.
because for me, I've yet to meet an addict of any type that hasn't chosen their addiction, their flavor,
Mm.
whether it's drugs, alcohol, computers, sex, what have you, that haven't adapted that into their life because of something of their past. There's always a catalyst, a starting place, something that they have experienced that has led them to choose this particular substance.
Mm.
And, a lot of it has to do with trying to quelch that fear, angst, or stress that's in their life. And, again, if you only take care of the drugs and alcohol, you've got an issue,
Mm.
because you're not taking care of what the catalyst was, what initiated that issue.
Yeah.
And so you've got
Invariably that comes to a degree of trauma that we has been suppressed, has been buried, has been pushed as far away from that individual as possible, and kind of all of those barriers of protection that the human brain puts in place to avoid that one last kind of situation that needs to be understood or resolved. But each time we put that layer of protection over that trauma, there's a vein, it's like a nerve that runs through, and each layer, the nerve gets a bit stronger. So anything into the future that kind of hits that nerve, it goes straight back to it, and all of the barriers, all of the excuses, everything else, just they don't work, because the nerve just goes straight back to it. And when we deal with the hurdles, when we deal with those barriers, we don't take away that nerve, we don't take away that trauma in any way. When I say take away that trauma, we're not giving coping strategies for that trauma. And I think a lot of times, like you say, the addiction model takes away the coping strategy without understanding the trauma that goes into it. But I think it's phenomenal that professionals like yourself and others are moving more to that understanding that the psychological impact of trauma is now a lot more widely understood. It's not as wide as it probably needs to be in order to affect real change, but it's growing in understanding. What would you like, the world of psychology to kind of move to, if you like? What's your kind of hope for the future with understanding of psychology?
Good question. Well, for me, it's I think that the field of psychology, counseling, psychotherapy, all the way across, I would like to see, first and foremost, those therapists to really come to a place of peace in their own lives.
Mm.
Secondly, as far as the global community goes, I would like for people to come to an understanding that, and I was going to say this earlier, is that psychologists are the last individuals you'll see in an exam room. I've had very few therapists in my office. I've had some. I even had one therapist at one point in one community that begged me to meet with them quite early. I've seen patients usually around 6 a.m., but asked to meet with me earlier than that. And I did because they didn't want the perception of the community to think that they were coming to see a therapist. And what is wrong in that is the stigma they're conveying and continuing to foster. And so, not only for therapists and psychologists, but for people, from presidents to prime ministers to all the way across the board, for people to come that are in leadership, especially, to come to a point of understanding that it's okay to have a mental health issue. And I would argue that we all have mental health issues. Some are more profound, but,
That's
and
like scale. So
what's
that's
that?
like scale.
That's right. And some are more profound, but, and really, if it's causing an issue, that's where we're looking at a disorder. Some people can masquerade with it. It's not, it's not causing you or anyone else problems, so we're not going to diagnose you, but it's causing you problems that will manifest, that will at one point or another display itself. But as far as the world of psychology and its acceptance, I do hope that we will come to a point of understanding that psychologists, it's an ever growing and adapting and evolving field, and that we need to be willing to grow and adapt with it. One example of that is back in the 80s, an individual that was homosexual would have been diagnosed in the field of psychology. People with certain preferences, we even had, if you had tattoos, if you had nose rings, earrings, you could fall into certain categories. And, the thing is we're coming to a point of understanding more and more that, homosexuality is not a disorder. That being homosexual is not wrong. That certain people may choose to wear tattoos or earrings doesn't make them disordered. In fact, some of them are quite healthy, right? But many of them are quite healthy.
I'm going to say, let's not start a debate about the health of tattoos.
No. But yeah, open a can of worms there, didn't I? But and that's the thing too, is it's funny. We're living in a time today that just doing that gives me one thing I would like to say, and that is what we say. We're seeing this in the media constantly right now. We're bombarded by this person tweeted this person said that, this person posted this, and we're reading into what messages are being sent out there. And we have to be cautious because we need to know the intent. But, and that's one thing I did want to state, because we need to stop being so hyper vigilant and back for a moment, take a deep breath and understand where people are coming from. And maybe even ask, a good therapist will often ask a patient to rephrase or restate something, sometimes more than once. And, because we may not have really heard what or understood what they were saying. And so, but back to your question, as far as psychology, I would like to see psychology to become a very mainstream part of our medical and our health community, I guess. And, it's something that I think definitely has gained ground over the last 30 years, but there's still a reluctance for professionals of all types to enter an exam room. And especially if they come with any sort of ego or narcissistic tendency, you will not see many of those enter the path. But to understand, just like if you have a broken arm, you're going to go see someone for that.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have a broken soul? What if you have an aspect of your life? You may have been unaware of that for years, decades, and suddenly something has pulled the Band-Aid off of that wound, exposing that wound. Well, it's okay.
Yeah.
And just like a broken arm, you're going to go see a physician for that. Go see your therapeutic physician for that wound that is now festering. And you know what? There are things that come up in my own life decades later that I had no realization that situation had affected me in the way that it affected me. And I am saying I am more than willing to go and see a therapist. I'm more than willing to see a counselor, because I know it's not for the therapist, and I don't care about anyone else in the community and what their perceptions may be of me. It's about my own health and my own psychological well-being. Yeah. And if we made psychology and mental health more accepting, we'd have less suicides of those that we see in the media, you know, from the stars to those that are in various leadership roles, taking their own lives because of the angst that they feel. Yeah. And, you know, there is still a huge stigma that surrounds the field of psychology, unfortunately.
And, you know, it's a sad state of affairs that we've, in a lot of our psychological systems, in a lot of our management of the sector, we've created a perception within the public that, you know, you need to be seeing a professional for this, and this. And by giving that perception over the last few decades, all of the triggers along the way that a counsellor, a therapist can ease that burden and support somebody actually adapting their coping strategies to those triggers at low levels. They don't get to those points. And what's happened to my mind is that the general populace has this idea that I'm okay. I don't need to go there yet. So I'll keep going until I can't go any further. And then I'll reach out because I can't cope now. This is just too much. I can't, it's just falling apart. You know, this is falling down. We wait until the bomb's exploded, but we've been loading up the debris and the shrapnel into that bomb for weeks, for years, because we don't reach out early.
Well, you know, and the problem is like physical health. You're an athlete. Did you only work out once a week or once a month? No, of course not.
It's just,
it's an ongoing thing, right?
The brain is a muscle.
It is. And so,
like any muscle, if you damage that muscle, you're going to need multiple professionals to support you get that muscle back into action. And the brain is the same. Exactly. When we forget that the brain's a muscle, we tear a muscle, we need help. We need physio. We need the right nutrition to come into play. We need that healing. And the brain is exactly the same.
And it's a preventative measure. You know, for me, I do a number of things every day. And now there are days, I skip, and there are days that I forget to do one aspect or something comes up, I can't, but I can tell a difference. But, you know, I try to every day do a moment of meditation. I try to, and throughout the day, I believe you can live a life in a meditative sort of state. a you know, a truly aware sort of state, present sort of state.
Yeah.
And, you know, but meditation and breathing is very to my work, but also listening to messages. Now, you can listen to messages and you can listen to messages. And the messages you listen to, you know, what messages you're entertaining are going to have an influence on you. And
Mhm.
so, what are the messages you're entertaining?
Yeah.
That's my question. And so, you know, I'm very conscious about the messages I entertain
Mm.
and deliberately entertain. And, you know, I recall hearing a speaker say this once. I think it may have actually been Wayne Dyer, Dr. Dyer, years ago, saying that when he goes to speak an event, he will not listen to television, radio, news of any type, read the newspaper before going and speaking at an event. And it stuck with me and it left an impression on me. And I began adapting that into my own life. In the past, I'd be driving to an event, flying to an event, and I would pick up a paper or I'd read something or hear something, and I'd entertain a message and walk into that event. It had an effect on me,
Mm.
and it had a powerful effect. And I would say that that is true in so many ways. You know, I enjoy having a drink, but I will not have a drink unless I'm in good standing mentally.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go to the drink when they're not in a good place.
Yeah.
And that's something that I disagree with. We should not be partaking of alcohol. And of course, we're medicating ourselves by doing that.
Mm.
But we should not be partaking of alcohol or food or anything else that may be our vice. We should not partake of it if we're in a bad place.
Yeah. And it's that self-awareness of the state of mind at the time, but also the strength to make that choice before getting to that place and having
Mhm.
that woven in. I want to say a massive thank you for your time this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure as always to spend time with you. I hope
Yes.
everyone that has watched has enjoyed as much as I have. If anybody wants to get the CPD certificate, just need to complete the questionnaire, just so we can validate those CPD certificates rather than just hand them out like confetti. But the video will be available on the APA YouTube channel under the playlist for the In Conversation With series. Um, I really have kind of got to know you a little bit more today, and I can't say enough. It's exactly why APA recognised you in this quarter with the Directors Award. The whole point of the Directors Award is to recognise and celebrate those massive contributions that individuals make to the world of psychology. At some point, I would love to do another one and talk about your writing and the work that you do to spread the word there. But for now, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And
It's been an absolute pleasure.
yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you at another In Conversation With very soon. Bye bye for now.